Yo, what's good, Spirit Squad? It's your boy Dre with another Spirit Snapshot, and today we're gonna go over the matchup against a deck that we didn't see too much in the spotlight in 2020, just because it was yet another deck that couldn't outpace Uro. But Uro is gone, which kind of allows this deck to come back into the metagame and have a real place. That's going to be Eldrazi Tron. So, for anybody who has not really played against this deck too much, it's basically Tron. You play Urza's Mine, Urza's Power Plant, Urza's Tower, you get a bunch of mana, life is exciting. However, this deck also has a plan B of being able to play relatively cheaply costed Eldrazi creatures, so it plays Matter Reshaper, Thought-Knot Seer, and Reality Smasher by using Eldrazi Temple as a plan B to not having Tron lands available. So if they get Tron, great, they have 1,000,000 mana, and if they don't get Tron, they still have Eldrazi Temple, and they still get 1,000,000 mana. So that's effectively how this deck works. You get to play cheaper Eldrazi than you normally would, including Thought-Knot Seer sometimes on turn 2. You get to curve that into the bigger Tron cards like Ugin the Ineffable, Walking Ballista, All Is Dust, all kinds of crazy Tron stuff, right? So that's basically what the deck is looking to do to us. And apparently, Chalice of the Void is pretty good again. So, check this sample deck list I'm about to do a whole primer on. So, yeah, Chalice of the Void, y'all. But about our specific matchup as Spirits against Eldrazi Tron, it is very swingy, but we actually can win this matchup. I think it's a little better than the matchup is against Green Tron, because this deck, while it does actually have a mid-range plan unlike Green Tron, it's also a lot less consistent than Green Tron, since this deck doesn't play like the Sylvan Scryings and stuff to actively try to find the Tron lands. It just either finds them or it doesn't. So we actually have a little more game against this version of the deck than we do against Green Tron, even though Green Tron is typically better against the metagame. But we have a lot of interaction with the lower end of this deck because they have a mid-range plan, and sometimes their deck is just clunky enough to the point where we can actually race their higher end too. So the key here is going to be, well, being aggressive, because they will kill us if we let the game go on long enough. And at the same time, we'll still have to interact with basically add or a buff for CMC. So, almost their whole deck. So just, things to be aware of. However, we got some great key cards on our end, and the biggest ones are going to be Skyclave Apparition to help get rid of things like Thought-Knot Seer, Karn the Great Creator, half of the things Karn the Great Creator can fish, and of course Matter Reshaper, Maze Mind Tome. Again, like half of their deck, right? Spell Queller does the same to, well, the same half of their deck, except just they don't get to resolve and use their cool things. And a big one here is actually going to be Shacklegeist, because this deck plays Thought-Knot Seer and Reality Smasher, both of which are much larger than our creatures. And also Karn the Great Creator can go and get creatures out of the sideboard, like Wormcoil Engine and like Sky Sovereign, the vehicle. And Shacklegeist does a great bit of work at just making sure that those giant creatures can't attack and outpace us. So I think that's going to be a card that's really not to be undervalued in this matchup. On their end, they have a lot of cards that really can just end the game kind of on the spot. The biggest one probably being Walking Ballista. So they play 3 copies of Walking Ballista in the main, 1 in the board so they can get it with Karn. It is ultra terrible for us to deal with, and every single list plays that configuration. The card sucks, get used to it. Others are going to be All Is Dust, just because, it makes us sacrifice almost our entire board, minus sometimes an Aether Vial, and they get to keep all of their stuff. So All Is Dust is terrible if it resolves. The upside of All Is Dust, though, against us is that it is a sorcery, which means that Mausoleum Wanderer can tag it. So that's a really sweet thing to make sure we know about. If they cast an All Is Dust and you have a Mausoleum Wanderer, sometimes you'll be able to counter it. So yeah, be on the lookout. And the other really big one out of these guys is going to be Karn the Great Creator. So Karn, obviously by itself, shuts off our Aether Vial, which is kind of annoying on its own. But also, it just goes and gets the problem that will solve whatever you're currently doing, right? So if you're doing creature things, they'll go in Walking Ballista, if you're playing a bit of a slower game, but you, I don't know, just have a bunch of lands, they have a bunch of lands, they can go and get like a Sundering Titan and kill off your lands and then, make more plays than you. If you're not really making too many plays, they can go and get Liquid Metal Coating or Trinisphere to turn our lands off. So there's a lot of really big things to know about. There's Ensnaring Bridge to make it so that we can't attack, and the game will then come down to whether they can resolve a big Walking Ballista before we can remove that Ensnaring Bridge and regain the ability to attack. There's all kinds of things that Karn the Great Creator can do, so we really need to be on the lookout for it. But now we do know kind of what the cards look like in this deck, and like I said, we actually have a lot of really good cards that can interact with this deck. So a bunch of our key cards are really going to be in the sideboard too. So out of the sideboard, almost all of us are playing Force of Negation and or Damping Sphere. And if you feel like the Tron variants are going to be things that you specifically have a problem with, then you can also play other cards in your sideboard. For example, you can play things like Ceremonious Rejection, Disdainful Stroke, Dovin's Veto, any white cards or green cards like Stony Silence or Collector Oof that turn off their artifacts, and that way they won't be able to use Expedition Map or Maze Mind Tome or Mind Stone or most of the cards they would get off of Karn or Walking Ballista. There's a lot of great ways that blue and white have, and even green, to interact with the entire Tron deck if we really want to devote those sideboard spots to it. So that's why I said every match is really swingy, but we can totally win some games. So what we did here is just kind of pulled up a sample game as always, and we're going to go ahead and see what happens against this Tron player. And they're on to play. Our hand here is not miserable, but it's not great. So we've got a Disdainful Stroke in here. We've got a Spell Queller, Rattle Chains, and Supreme Phantom. And this isn't that bad because starting from turn 2 here, we have the ability to hold up a choice of either Rattle Chains or Disdainful Stroke. And that's actually going to be pretty sweet because if they play something that we care about, Disdainful Stroke. If they don't play something we care about, Flash and Rattle Chains. And then that'll give us the ability to hold up instant speed interaction or a clock for the entire rest of the game. So I do like this hand even if it is a little slow. So they go ahead and they start off with a Tron land here, and we get another Supreme Phantom, which may or may not be relevant. So we're going to start off with our Flooded Strand. That's going to more than likely get us a copy of Hallowed Fountain here at the end of their turn. Okay. Now we untap and we have Mausoleum Wanderer. Now we're not going to play Mausoleum because we still want to be able to hold up either the Disdainful Stroke or Rattle Chains, and we see that they actually have their Tron lands right on turn 3, so that's exactly as the doctor ordered for them. So something big and scary. Ugin certainly counts as big and scary, so we are going to counter Ugin. They don't have a play with the other 1 mana they have, but what we're going to do here is hold up either Spell Queller by itself, or if they don't do anything we care about, we can Flash in Rattle Chains and then Mausoleum Wanderer so that we're using all of our mana. So that's really the plan, is to hold up at least one of those options. So we go ahead, Matter Reshaper by itself, not really a threat. A second one though, we're going to use Spell Queller here just for the sake of using our mana. Honestly, Matter Reshaper against our deck doesn't typically matter too much. Haha. We're going to ignore that. But we do want to make sure that we are presenting a clock, using all of our mana efficiently, and when possible, keeping their cards off the table. So we are still going to use our Spell Queller here, rather than Rattle Chains Mausoleum Wanderer. Okay, so an Aether Vial's okay. So let's go ahead and attack for 2. And this is where we're basically going to have to start trying to generate a clock. And Sky Sovereign sucks. Sky Sovereign's going to get to attack every turn because Matter Reshaper has 3 power, so it can crew Sky Sovereign by itself. So that's going to be really annoying. We are going to have to try to find a way to make sure we are able to either get this thing off the table. A Shacklegeist would be perfect because Shacklegeist taps this thing. Or just try to outpace it with our 3 lords. None of those are going to be easy, but oh, and they have a Warping Whale too for our creature, so that really sucks actually. Because worst case scenario, we actually might have been able to use that as a way to go ahead and eventually interact with or block the Sky Sovereign here. And the first order of business here, because we are already being outpaced, is for us to probably get on this Damping Sphere train basically ASAP, because they don't have a way to remove this from the table. Once this card has resolved against Eldrazi Tron, they literally cannot get it off the table. So they are basically down to 3 mana again, and they have been missing land drops, which tells us that they are probably going to be either limited in what they can play, or, well, they're definitely stuck playing 1 card a turn at most. So if we can get out of this next turn relatively unscathed, we might actually have a chance. So we're going to go ahead and attack here, because there's no point in holding it back, because Sky Sovereign can just kill the Spell Queller anyway. So there's no point really in holding it up and not getting our 2 damage in. So they are going to... Oh, that actually kind of sucks for them. So yeah, that's pretty bad. So they actually wanted to go ahead and cast the Matter Reshaper, and they clicked through that. So that is pretty unfortunate for them. And this part's a little sad times for us, because, like... Oh, you know what? We screwed that up, I think. Did we? No. 3, 4... No, we're fine. Okay. And the reason we couldn't cast a second Supreme Phantom there is because of this Damping Sphere, so that actually sucks. And... Okay, so the Damping Spheres definitely got them unable to play a card here. So we are doing our best here to play some defense with what we have, because Damping Sphere is stopping them from playing their spells. Like, they're clearly holding a hand of 4+ CMCs. So we're actually just not going to attack it all here. We're going to go ahead, see what they do, because we're at 6 life. This Sky Sovereign cannot be allowed to go through. They do blow up Blast Zone, so we need to just put things in play with our Aether Vial, because Aether Vial is going to die here. Mausoleum Wanderer is dead too, which kind of sucks, but like, we can flash in one of these creatures and potentially get a pretty good block on this Sky Sovereign. So if we can double block and get rid of this Sky Sovereign, that's actually going to end up being very good for us, because that's, at this point, our only real way of, well, effectively getting it the hell off the table. So we're going to flash in Rattle Chains, and we're going to get rid of this, and then we're going to block like this, and this is going to kill both of our creatures, but now we have the ability to hold up this Spell Queller, see what happens. Okay, we're going to take this, go down to 3. And we are going to go down to 3 there just because there's nothing they can do really to take us from 3 to anything else. And we are going to Spell Queller the Expedition map because of the fact that they can't really play another spell in their deck because of the Damping Sphere. So if they have, like, I don't know, another Expedition map, then whatever, so be it. But anything really outside of that, they just don't have access to in their deck. So let's see what we're doing here. Okay, so they're doing nothing, most likely thanks to our Damping Sphere. So we're going to do that, and we're going to simply attack with Supreme Phantom here. Yeah, so the reason that we're attacking with just Supreme Phantom is because this is a ultra safe block. They can't, like, dismember this plus do anything else, and they can't get rid of this without getting rid of this first. And even if they do get rid of just Skull Captain, this is still not going to die to even a block. So if they spin into a land, it still can't provide more than 1, so whatever. We block Matter Reshaper, it dies, it goes into the graveyard, it activates its triggered ability, and maybe it gets a land so that it can then cast a Thought Knot Seer. Who cares? Because this is 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 right on the table. So our only job here is to simply not die, and that looks pretty likely given our scenario. So let's go ahead and block here. So they are going to spin, and they spin a card, not a land. So that was actually kind of a really sweet thing that happened here. So they got to play first that game. They got to natural Tron on turn 3. They played a Sky Sovereign that killed creatures. They got to double spell on the turn where they had Tron and get around our spell queller. A lot really happened there. So, like, they got the removal spell, they got to cast a big dummy, they got to blast zone 2 cards, so they got their 2 for 1 on when they finally did see a land drop. And honestly, Damping Sphere by itself really held up the fort. And we just, we saw 2 decent sideboard cards and did our best to kind of hold up the fort until we could take over, and that's exactly what happened. So as we see, these are games that you are able to win. Just make sure that if you think you're going to be playing against a lot of Eldrazi Tron on your own, make sure you devote a couple of sideboard spots to the big mana matchups and just kind of play accordingly. Like, you need to set up a clock, you need to interact with their board, because Eldrazi Tron, as we see, can develop a board very quickly, and just make sure you're kind of on your P's and Q's about what cards resolve and what cards don't. But that's going to be our Spirit Snapshot for today. As always, if you like what you're watching, just make sure to like the video, sub to the channel. I will see y'all on the next one.